again. Tonight we're actually going to start Gemara. This is what it looks like actually in the book. After we finished our lesson last night, where we did Eilu Mitziyus, it comes across on the screen. There's a page. Congratulations, you're ready to start learning Gemara. So that's where we are, and we're going to start from the beginning of the Gemara, immediately following the Mishnah that we learned last night about matzah paris Eilu Mitziyus Shalai. There are some things that are yours, you're allowed to keep. Some of them you have to announce, and we're going to go through this as actually with the Gemara, with the steps that we spoke about. Just two orders of business that I wanted to share with you from last night. Some of the things I skipped over because I didn't want to overwhelm you. This is another illustration. I just thought it might be helpful. It's shorter than the other one. If you remember, we had that thing with the potato chips and the Pringles. And just quickly to review, we were explaining how dialogue goes in the Gemara. And very often a Mishnah is quoted. Again, the Mishnah came first. It's much shorter and it's succinct. It's to the point. It just says what the halachas are or other information about Jewish life. It just mentions that. And then the Gemara, we call Amoraim, those are the people, they discuss things about the Mishnah, clarification, asking questions. We also said that there's something called a Brisa that were words of Tanaim that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi did not commit to paper and did not include with the entire Mishnah. Obviously, it would have made Mishnah that much longer. So very often, in the vibrant dialogue that was going on in the Beis Medrash, so somebody would say a Mishnah, someone would raise their hand and say, hey, I heard a Brisa, I heard from my Rebbe orally that there's a Brisa that says a different halacha. The example Rabbi Spivak gave was that the Rebbe said, let's say potato chips is a very Pri Hadama, blessing Hashem, the things that came from the ground, and we found out that it was Pringle, I'm sorry, and he says, I'm sorry, there's a shahakal. The bracha is actually a shahakal, not a Bar Pri Hadama. And we said that there's two ways to explain it. One way is he says, look, I know there's a Mishnah, but I heard a Brisa from my Rebbe, and that's my tradition, this is what we heard. Or we could talk about two different situations. One was talking about Pringles, and one was talking about regular potato chips. So if it retains the look of a potato, that bracha would be a Bar Pri Hadama, but Pringles, since it's compressed, it would actually stay with the shahakal. Here's another example of how Rabbi Spivak, in talking about this dialogue of how the Shakla V'Tarya works, okay? Shakla V'Tarya is a word for discussion. We'll get out my trusty little, here we go. Okay, so if you see here, a sugya is made up of Shakla V'Tarya. Shakla V'Tarya is a give and take of the Gemara. We start with a statement, and then we ask a question. I told this to you orally, but I just thought I'd show it to you inside. This is from a different book that Rabbi Spivak made called the Hachana L'Gemara, but it's the same concept. And let's skip ahead. If you look at these 5 steps that we discussed them all yesterday, a she'ela is different than a kasha. A she'ela is a she'ela's birur. It's a request for information. What time is it? What's the halacha? What time? Any question that you ask is that's called a she'ela's birur. Lawrence, I'll take it up when we ask questions. Okay. I'm sorry. He wants to know if it's available for sale or download. You can buy. You can go to. Let me finish, Lawrence. I'll get to you later, please. So we have a she'ela is a question, a request for information. Teretz is a response to that. A raya is a proof, usually to this teretz, to prove that it's true. A dechia is we disprove the proof, and finally we come with a proof that sticks. Okay? So let's go through this now, knowing what you know. Now that we did those steps, remember, one of the things that we kept talking about yesterday and the day before was my overriding educational philosophy that we don't teach two things at once. Again, it's not just me, it's based on research. But you don't teach two things simultaneously. It just brings confusion. So better to have that body of information first, any tangential things that you might need to know, and then we can weave them into the Gemara, and you know those, you'll see, look at this. Now that I told you, Shayla, Teretz, now that we did these steps, these logical steps, look how you can identify them in this example that the author, Rabbi Spivak, fifth grade Rebbe in our yeshiva, made. So here we go. David asked his brother Chaim, do you know what mommy's making for supper? Okay, so we know that's a she'ela, right? Do you know what mommy's making for supper? Is an open-ended question. Chaim answered, we're having hamburgers. That's his teretz. So he answers, so if you're counting this, let's say, this I'll just put a blur here for number one. He answers, step number two is we're having hamburgers, right? That's the second logical step. And he brings a proof. He brings a raya. It's just typical Rabbi Spivak, just, bringing color to the canvas and explaining it in a way that kids and adults can understand it better. I know because I saw mommy taking some ground beef out of the freezer this morning. And then he says, well, responded David, that doesn't mean anything. Maybe we're having meatballs. He pushes away this question, this proof. He says, well, it's not a good proof. Maybe we're having meatballs. And he answers that there's hamburger buns, and that brings an end to the discussion. Now, so again, it's just another way of bringing out in practice this type of discussion. Now, the other thing, if you're in this original handout, yesterday we were going over the challenges, the 8 challenges that we have, that one would have for mastering Gemara, right? Language barrier, punctuation, historical context. So here, everyone in Gemara speaks an insider talk. I wrote here, spike the football. And I decided that we're not going to do this right away, but I figured we'll do it tonight. This is how I ran my classroom. If you remember yesterday, we were talking about examples that you could use in a practical sense that bring about the same, something that the children or adults are familiar with. Let's say cars in a parking lot rather than the oxen that the Gemara discusses. Again, just bringing it down to their level. So I would have done this in my classroom. I didn't do this specifically, but this is the type of thing I was encouraging you over the past 2 lessons, the 2 shiurim, to think about being creative as you're learning. This is to prepare you to learning with your children. Hopefully, your son's, your child's Rebbe does things like this and makes it, brings examples and analogies and things that will bring it more to life, like this hamburger situation, right? To do something like this to explain what a question and an answer is. So here is the thing called spike the football. And I think that the reason I think it's kind of very relevant and important is that you really see that you could make a Gemara discussion about this. First of all, if you could just quickly just give me a chat. Can you see this? Because sometimes it only shows if it's PDFs. Can anyone see this thing that says starts with President Obama? Just drop a chat if you could or can't, please, so I'll know about bin Laden. 1 second, folks. You cannot see it. Nobody sees it. Problem. Okay. Okay, so let me see if I can solve this. I don't think I can. Okay, so by the way, I sent folks, just did anybody see the email? I sent the vocabulary words. Did you folks get it? I hope you picked it up. If not, it's in the email tonight. You can download it. So I'm going to read it. For some reason, the Zoom only shows things that are PDFs. What happened was, I'll send these slides to you in tomorrow's email. When I send the recording, I'll send these slides to you. Again, my mind runs around from time to time, so this kind of thing comes a little bit easier for me. But I do encourage you to think in those terms, in the terms of finding creative materials. Whatever your child is learning, I can almost guarantee you that in addition to learning with your child, whether you do or don't do that, if you know what they're up to in Gemara and you can come up with some really creative way to teach them what they're learning in class in a different way, that you'll have them eating out of your hands, because it's a lot of fun to think, to go this. So I'll read to you very quickly. President Obama, after bin Laden was killed, he made this announcement: I think that Americans and people around the world are glad that he's gone, but we don't need to spike the football. Okay, and what he was talking about is why they didn't show bin Laden's body in a graphic way. And they just buried it, and didn't make a big fuss about it. And he said, spike the football. Now, that's insider talk. Remember when we were talking about you need a whisperer, somebody has to explain to you what's going on, because there's a lot of background information you don't know. President Obama used an American slang, an American term, spike the football. Now, the interesting part about that is spike the football could mean two things. I mean, you could really build a great Talmudic argument. Using these steps that Rabbi Spivak, those 8 steps, you could actually build a great argument on this story as it evolved. Now, what President Obama was talking about is that when someone scores a touchdown, now I'm not explaining a touchdown, so you need a whisperer for that too. So a touchdown is an objective of a football team to score. So when they score, the fellow who runs into the end zone which is the end, which gets points for your team, he could take the ball and slam it into the ground as a thing of celebration. That's called spiking the football. So what President Obama was very clear to President Obama was not clear to many people who were in Europe or people who didn't know, the American terminology. So, and it turns, so I'll read you, again, there's 6 slides here. The second is in American football, when a player scores a touchdown, he slams the ball to the ground in the end zone, also used as an expression of celebration and victory. Now that makes very good sense in the context of what President Obama was saying. We got bin Laden, we wanted to get him. We don't want to get graphic about it and talk about it in ways that might enrage the Islamic world and make all kinds of problems for national security. So on a chat, I was looking for this. Somebody asked the question, again, I'll send you the slides tomorrow. What does President Obama's phrase, "we don't need to spike the football," mean? Somebody looked it up online, and spiking the football could also mean if a player, the quarterback, the one who runs the plays, can throw the ball into the ground to stop the game clock. It's too much to explain. You need a whisper, and I don't want to spend the time on it. But what was interesting is that guy got the wrong definition of spiking the football. So the people, this is a chat, and somebody asked, what do you mean? What does that have to do with bin Laden? And somebody answered that in fact, the correct thing, that this is what bin Laden meant, and explaining it in context. And if you look up the word spike in Wikipedia, feel free to do it now. I was an 8th grade Rebbe. I don't get distracted so quickly, so you can feel free to look it up yourself. If you look up spike it says gridiron football in American football, it says both of these things. Spike could mean when they stop the play or when they celebrate after scoring. So again, this is just like we had this case of, listing the different ways of, let's say with potato chips, that same dynamic could come into play in many different ways. Okay, now let's get started with the Gemara. Now I will introduce you to the actual text of Gemara in a lesson or two. We'll show like Rebbe did here in this homework sheet at the end of the 10 lessons of introduction to Gemara. For now, we'll just show this is the actual text of the Mishnah. Okay, Eilu Mitziyus Shalai. I'll review. We did this yesterday, and we're actually going to start, which is pretty common. We're going to start this. The Gemara is going to start from something mentioned in the Mishnah, and that's the way we described it, right? That a Mishnah says what the ruling is, the Mishnah says what the halacha is, and then we discuss later. The Gemara asks questions, seeks clarification, and as follows. So let's just review what we'll need for now. So it says, Eilu Mitziyus Shalai, these are the found objects that he's allowed to keep. The Eilu Chayiv Lahachras, I'm sorry, I blocked that. The Eilu Chayiv Lahachras, and these one must announce, right? He's Chayiv, he's responsible to announce it. And the Gemara goes to different situations. Eilu Mitziyus Shalai, again, we said these are his and those he has to announce. Going back to the first one, I'll give you examples of Shalai, and we're only going to do the first one because this is what the Gemara starts with. Matzah Peiros Mefuzaran. If he found fruit that was spread out, then he's allowed, the finder is allowed to keep it, because the person had yish. Yish means giving up hope. The verb is mi yayish. He gave up hope because they're scattered and there's no simon, there's no identifiable sign to it. It was just loose fruit. So he has no hope of getting it back. So the person is allowed to keep it. And then we go to money and grain in a public domain, figs, and all other types of items. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to start with a Memra. So here we go. If it's the first time you're really learning Gemara, celebrate. There'll never be another first time for you. So this is exciting. So enjoy. I hope it's the beginning of a great journey, and I hope to have some small part in getting you started in a way that's helpful to you. So let's go over again, going over the discussion here. So the Memra again is a statement. Okay, the first step. I'll use the marker to highlight certain things. Okay. Okay, here we go. So Matzah, so the first step of our Mishnah, the Gemara quotes the first halacha of our Mishnah, right? Which is what we said. This begins a discussion of that halacha. Since it's not asking, answering, or proving anything, it's called a Memra. A Memra was just plain vanilla. It was just a statement. And when we have an object, usually the Gemara starts off with a Memra, and then we start dissecting it. So this really, it works out pretty well, because the first few shiurim we're going to be doing this Gemara, and this is actually I would say simpler, but it's not as complicated as the Yishal Amidas topic that we're going to be starting the end of next week, which is certainly more complicated. This, thankfully, is a nice introduction. You can go into the pool through the shallow water, and work your way through it. So a Memra, again, is a statement. We have this quote bubble here. And Matzah Peres Mufazaron, again, this is the exact text of the Mishnah, right? Matzah Peres Mufazaron, right here. He found those fruits so the Gemara starts by saying, Matzah Peres Mufazaron, he found fruit that was scattered. Okay, what Rebbe does here in the translation, similar to the way ArtScroll or other translations do, is he found scattered produce. The part that's not in brackets is actually the exact text translated word for word. Matzah, he found. It's a little out of order. Peiros, produce, mifuzaran, that was scattered. So this is actually the exact translation. I'm going to spend a moment and just highlight them because it'll help. I won't do this obviously every time. So matzah means here, he found. Okay, so again, the part that's in brackets are some words that you might need for context or to make it grammatically correct in an English sentence in English that you'll be able to follow more clearly. So matzah peiros mefuzaran, he found scattered produce. So peiros, the word peiros means produce. It's out of order because it's a different language. So that's very common when we have different languages that we use, the words don't necessarily follow in order. So matzah peiros mefuzaran, he found scattered fruit. So the word mefuzaran means scattered. So this would be a proper rendition, literally translated. Matzah, he found peiros, fruits, mefuzaran, that was scattered. In English, we move the sequence about. He found scattered produce. So if he found it, he may keep it. Okay, so that's the word that we need. So that's the first halach in the Mishnah. The memra is a statement, and it says if somebody found scattered produce, he's allowed to keep it. Okay, that's what the Mishnah says. If somebody, the first halacha of the Mishnah taught that if one who finds scattered produce may keep it. The Gemara is now ready to discuss this halacha. So again, this is the pattern. You see this perfect pattern that we were discussing. The Mishnah, again, which came from the previous generation, from the Tanaim, the Gemara was our body of Torah Sheba'al Peh that we got through the generations. Went from Rebbe to Talmud, from Rebbe to student, and the Mishnah was closed out. The Mishnah was more cryptic. It just listed just the facts. And then there's a discussion about it, and which is a logical question. The Gemara is going to ask a question. So we have a she'ela. This is a request for information. This is another one of the 8 categories. And the she'ela says this is step 2. You'll see why Rabbi Spivak did this, step 1, step 2, because in the homework sheets and in the review sheets, we place a great emphasis on delineating exactly what the steps are, and it really helps keep the order in mind, what's going on. Okay, so the Gemara asks a she'ela in order to clarify the memra, v'kama, and how much. V'kama, and how much. Now again, here we go. We got a whisperer here, right? A whisperer, we said yesterday, meant a whisper was something that somebody whispers in your ear to give you context, as if you have a good friend next to you that who's able to explain to you. When people use insider talk, like Spike the football, you have somebody next to you, you tap him or her on the shoulder and say, hey, can you help me with this one? So, and how much is just a literal translation of the comma. But in context, how much does it have to be scattered? I'm sorry, I blocked that a bit, in order for the owner to be able to keep it. Okay, so the Gemara, the word scattered is a very loose term. So let's just read the text. I mean, you could read this yourself, but it's important, so we'll just go over it a bit. So the Gemara wants to clarify what the Mishnah said when it said that the produce is scattered. It's important to know, because if the produce isn't scattered or gathered in a pile, the finder would have to announce it, right? Because that would be considered a siman. But we want to know exactly what the clarification of it, to quantify that. What does it mean? So again, if you didn't quantify it, every person would decide for themselves if it's scattered or not. Okay, so the kama, and the Gemara asks, how much does it have to be scattered in order to be able to keep it? So this was the question, the kama. How much does it have to be scattered? Again, going back to here, going back to, matzah peiros mefuzaran, I'm sorry, right here. Okay, so this thing, Eilu Mitziyus shalai, matzah peiros mefuzaran. Again, we're going on this text that we had previously, right? So this here, matzah peiros mefuzaran, he found scattered fruit. And later, this is the same text here in the physical Gemara, the actual text of the Gemara. He found scattered fruit. So the Gemara has a logical question. Well, what does it mean scattered? Does it mean really scattered, are scattered all over the place? Does it mean just a few specks here, like it's very, very thin? Does it mean like sort of in the middle? Or does it mean that it's just not in one particular pile? Okay, so this was a way for the Gemara to try to quantify it. And, we do this in our own lives, right? If you're at work and a boss tells you, he says, listen, you go enjoy your coffee break, but let's not overdo it. So what does that mean? Is that 5 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? So when you get instructions that aren't precise, it's difficult sometimes to fulfill them. So if we left it to anyone's understanding, it would be messy. So the Gemara says, Vikama, how much does it have to be scattered in order to have it be considered enough that the person would be able to keep it? So here we have a tshuva. Again, a tshuva was a response. A tshuva was an answer to the question. That the sheila was, how much does it have to be? And this tshuva, right, this is step 3 of the Gemara, right? So this is step 3. And I'll do the words first. So let me pull them in a bit. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says that the proper kav, one kav, which is a measure, be'arba amais, in 4 amais. Now, you see there's a lot of brackets here, right? Because the translation doesn't cover it. So a kav of produce spread out in an area of 4 amos, it's 4 square amos actually, that's considered scattered enough. Now, in the times of the Gemara, that was perfect because they used a kav as a measurement and of volume or weight. Usually it would be volume in this case. And arba amos was like we would use inches or feet, or in European countries or Mid-Eastern countries or other places around the world, they would use millimeters or centimeters or meters. So that was a measurement that worked for them. So this paragraph here, Rebbe says about really explain this, that we used different units than we have today. So like we use inches, feet, and mile, right? But times of the Gemara, they would do amos and tfachim. And so therefore, that was his answer. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak answers, kav, if there's a kav of produce spread out over 4 amos, then that would be considered spread out enough that the person would be able to keep it. So again, a kav is a measure of volume. As part of our mission here to try to make things, use visual aids to be able to teach it to kids and adults, you see how helpful it is for us. So this is an actual, someone's hand and a Coke bottle with the top cut off with the measure of what a kav was. An amma, let's just slide down a little bit, an amma was a measurement of a person of average height from the elbow to the end of the middle finger. And a lot of the measurements that the Chachamim used in that time did not require tools. Obviously, they didn't have, measuring sticks the way we have them today, or a yardstick, or, the slides that you have. So it was more comfortable. It was easier to use, parts of someone's body, or how much a person would walk in a full day. So these were all measurements that were used like that. So an amma is a measure of distance, but we'll keep it simple. An amma is approximately 2 feet. And here, Rebbe, again, just great idea, 4 ammas by 4 ammas. This corresponds to a person's hand. Okay, so you see, this is obviously much, 4 by 4 ammas is much greater. If it's spread out in this amount, then the person is allowed to keep it because it's considered too spread out, and the owner would not want to bother and come back to get it. Okay, so that's how we work it. So let's just go back to the Gemara again, but again, just with the visual aids. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, Kav va'arba amas. That's the amount. One kav, again, this measure, in 4 amos, if it's spread out over 4 amos, that means if somebody comes to a field or a place and he sees like these tiny kernels of grain spread out over a large area, the owner's never going to sit down and get on his hands and knees and start picking them up. He'll just move on. So that would be considered a person would be miyayish. Let's just quickly review the 3 steps. Okay, so the Gemara, this is how a simple the Gemara discussion was. We had something in a Mishnah that gave us information that said matzah peres mufuzarin. Again, let's just quickly go back. Eilu Mitziyus shaloi ve'eilu chayav lahachras. These are his, and this he has to announce. Matzah peres mufuzarin. If he found peres that are spread out, if they're mifuzarim, then he's allowed to keep it. So now the Gemara comes with a logical question. So matzah peres mufuzarin, we said that statement, if he found scattered produce, he can keep it. So we ask a she'ela v'kama, and how much is that? How much does it have to be scattered? So the Gemara answers a tshuva to this question, and we said the answer is Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says kav, a common measurement that was used by arba amas in an area of, and again, this is an amma, the person's arm in context to 4 amas. If you must know a little history, we actually used this this workbook that the kids had in their hands to show size, and we decided it might not be respectful to something we use for Gemara, so we used the hand instead. But that was, again, it's just to show context for learners. Okay, so for Kama, he says it's a kav ba'arba amas, and this ends our lesson number 1. Okay, so shiur number 1, actually these are called, we refer to them as shiurim, lessons with the pre-Gemara, and this is actually the Gemara. Now, you'll notice we have different types of review questions, and I believe I mentioned it the other day that these kids, learners, adults with different learning profiles might find some components of this easier than others, and it's very healthy to get a real diagnostic assessment of how the learner is mastering Gemara by doing these various questions. Okay, so this put it all to just retranslate and explain the Gemara. Matzah peres mufuzarin, if he found peres that was spread out. V'kama, that was, again, up until this was the Mishnah, right? This section came from the Mishnah. V'kama, question mark, how much was this? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, kav v'arba amas. He explains that it's a kav in 4 amas. Okay, what halacha does the Gemara quote from our Mishnah? Matzah peres mufuzarin. What does the Gemara ask? V'kama. Why is it important to know? Because if we left it up to our own discretion, it would be impossible. Okay, why is it called a she'ela? Because it's a request for information. And the answer to the Gemara's question is what Rabbi Yitzchak said. Okay? And here's another component here, identifying the steps. Again, these are common, we have vocabulary review, but these again are common review questions that the children, the learners, yourselves, the learners that follow our program, the author, Rabbi Spivak, gets them used to a certain style of questions and comments that will come at the end of each lesson. So it helps them identify, this is identify the steps. So here we go. Memra is underlined the Memra, okay? Matzah peres mufuzarin, this is the Memra, this is the statement, right? This was a statement. Matzah peres mufuzarin, that was the Memra, because it was a quote from our Mishnah, okay? And then the second thing is circle the she'ela, v'kama. It's only a one-word she'ela, a one-word question, v'kama. And how much does it have to be? And bracket the tshuva. So the third thing is Rabbi Yitzchak comes along and it tells us that it's a kav ba'arba amar. Oops, no, too close to the column. Okay. Okay, so v'amar Rabbi Yitzchak, so we have this the sheila, and he answers it. He answers this tshuva. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak kav ba'arba amas. So again, this is just very, very helpful in organizing the thought. Again, since Gemara doesn't have punctuation, and since sometimes these dialogue threads just keep going, so it's helpful to stop and understand these various, what the vocabulary words mean. It's just a way of self-assessing, okay, and then putting it all together. Go through the various components of the Gemara. Okay, so vocabulary review, then you have matching. I won't do that. We'll just do one more share and we'll call it a night. Okay, so let's go, or maybe part of the share. Let's see how far we get. Okay, and like I said, I'll take your questions after we're done. So far we have 3 questions. 3 steps, right? Again, we had a statement, Matzah Paris Mefazaron. We had a Shaila question, how much? And we had an answer that said Kav in 4 Amos. Okay, so now we have this, right? This bomb icon that means Akasha. Someone's going to try to dismantle what Rabbi Yitzchak said. Okay, so here we go. In Shir Aleph, we learned that Rabbi Yitzchak said a kav and 4 amos, he could keep it. If there's more than a kav and 4 amos, the finder has to announce it. Now, the Gemara says that here's the Gemara's question. Why should the amount of grain or the space really matter? What should matter is if he gave up hope. So shouldn't it be more important to see how it was placed? Does it look like somebody put it down? In other words, someone sat down for lunch and he had some grain in a bag and he laid it out neatly on the floor next to where he was sitting. And then he got up and forgot it. He's more likely to come back because it doesn't look like it fell out of his pocket. So now we actually start getting into a little bit of logic. So the Gemara says, "Hey chidami, how did it happen? Derech nefila, if it was in a manner of falling." Okay, the word nefila, nafal is to fall. Okay, if it looks like it fell, meaning that it's totally scattered around, afilu tuva nami, even if it's more than a kav, he still should be able to keep it. V'i derech hinuach, if it looks like he put it down, afilu batzir mehachi, even less than that, namila, he also could not keep. So what the Gemara is saying, what we're saying in essence here is the determining factor of, and this is what Gemara, again, this is a good example of what Gemara looks like. We came up with an explanation of a kav in 4 amos, and now the Gemara begins to challenge this and says like this. There are 2 ways, you're doing some detective work. You see this grain on the floor. There are really 2 ways to evaluate if a person would give up hope or not. One is, like we started saying, it depends how far it's spread out, and meaning that a person would have to, would not want to expend the energy of going through all this and would just give up hope and walk away from it. But now the Gemara says, hold it. If the whole idea is if a person gave up hope, why are we concentrating on the density of the lost object? Why don't we concentrate on looking to see if it was done in a way that the owner had knowledge that it was there? If it fell out of in other words, if a merchant was traveling 2 miles and he gets to his destination and sees that the bag tore, he's forget it, I give up, I don't know where it fell. But if, like I said, if he had lunch in a certain place and he placed the grain in a nice neat pile, then he won't give up hope because he'll just ride back to it. So again, the broader question is, why is Rabbi Yitzchak concentrating on the fact whether or not there is a lot in an area isn't the fact that if it looks like it fell, that should be more important than how dense it is. Okay, so here's the question again. Again an illustration. Kav Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. This was Rabbi Yitzchak's statement. Kav ba'arba ames, one kav a measure in 4 ames in that space. He's allowed to keep it. So he asks a question. Well, if it's derech hinuach, if it looks like he placed it down there, so the finder shouldn't be able to keep it no matter how little it is, because the person, if he didn't go too far, he's going to wind up coming back. And if it looks like it fell, then he should be able to keep it anytime, because the person is not going to know where he lost it. So what was Rabbi Yitzchak talking about? If it was derech hinuach, if it was placed in a way that it was clearly placed there with knowledge and then the person forgot, so it would be logical that the person, the finder, cannot keep it. If it was derech nefila, if it was in a way that it fell, then he should be able to keep it regardless of what the amount. So what was Rabbi Yitzchak talking about? This kav ba'arba amas, that was a way of letting us know what you could keep and what you can't. Then let me just see. Okay, I'm just going to do this, and we'll just finish this, and then we'll do 5, a bit of it, and then we'll stop. We'll review and then stop. You're just starting this now, so I would much rather do less and do it well and give you time to absorb rather than just pile on information. So our question was the step 4, which was the question that we asked, is we said, well, what's Rabbi Yitzchak talking about? Why do you need a kav ba'arba amas, that measure in that amount of space? In other words, density. There's 2 things that could swivel this. One is the density, and the other was intent. Did the person know that he left it there? Was it placed down intentionally? And the question of the Gemara is, was whether or not what was Rabbi Yitzchak talking about? It would make sense that derech nefila, in a way of falling down, would be able to be kept by the finder, because we'd assume the fellow didn't know anything about it. And if it was derech hinuach, if he placed it down, it should be even less than this. Okay, so this was the question. What was Rabbi Yitzchak talking about? We'll just do the teretz, the answer. And the Gemara says that it was actually talking about that needed to be corrected. I'm not going to go through these words. Havamina maskana. We'll leave this for next time. Let's take a pause where we are now. And so Amar Rav, let's just finish this up, and I'll be delighted to take your questions if you have any. Amar Rabbi Ukva bar Chama, Rabbi Ukva the son of Chama said, it wasn't talking about a lost object. B'machnashta debei dari askinan. Tough words. Machnashta debei dari is the gathering of the threshing floor. Now, what he's saying is, this was, what the kernels had. There was a covering of the kernel, and then there was the grain in the middle. We say, in the times of the Gemara, the wealthy people were able to buy bread or flour that only had the middle on it, and now today whole wheat is considered, at least as valuable as the regular stuff. But what they would do is they would pile up the grain on the ground. They would pile up the grain in a round area like this, and animals would trample it, and they would just run around, or people would hit it with sticks and stuff or if you had a tiny amount, you would just do this with your hands, like you get the peanut, in the inner shell of a peanut. So so the big idea, forget this detail for a moment of where it was. The Gemara answers, we thought that Rabbi Yitzchak was talking about a lost object it's actually talking about something that was left behind, meaning not that it's a question of whether it was lost or not. If someone comes to a threshing place, which is called Machnashta de Beidari, if someone comes to this threshing place and finds a kav in Arba Amos, then you say that the fellow will probably come back and get it. Meaning that, let's say he had to go out to lunch, or he had to take care of an animal or something else, so he left some stuff behind, but he'll come back because it's not that difficult for him to collect it. So, and if it's less than that, then you're allowed to keep it. The owner just walked away from it. So again, the initial we call it. Okay, let's leave it here. So the initial thought was that we're talking about a lost object that that we found in the street, and we answer that it wasn't a lost object, it was an object that was left behind. And therefore, the only thing that Rabbi Yitzchak would be talking about, the only thing that would make a difference is whether or not it was, whether or not there's enough value for the person to come back, and therefore the Kav Ba'arba Ames, it seems to be a good way to go at it. You see there's a lot more Gemara. I'm just going to go, let me see if there's a review sheet that we should do for this. Just a moment. Now that might be here. So underline the kasha and do the teretz. Maybe, I'm sorry, let's just leave it as it is. Heichidami, how was it? Iderach nafila, this was the question. If it looked like it fell down, afila tuvanami, even if there's much more produce. The iderach inuach, if it was left, afila batzmi achinami, if it was left there and piled up neatly, so you can't take it anyway. What was Rabbi Yitzchak talking about? Rav Ukfa Bar Chama says, "V'machnashta debeidari askina." It's talking about a threshing floor. That's the answer. And a threshing floor is a place that it was left behind with intent. So we don't have a question of whether it fell or not, or whether it was neatly organized. It was just left behind. And the question is, did the person who left it behind, did he do it with the understanding that if there isn't enough, if there's very little grain in a large area, the guy's just going to walk away from it. We can make a fair assumption that he'll walk away from it. And the question of how it got there, it doesn't exist here. Let's do a quick review of the Gemara. We'll generally speaking, after every shir, we'll go over the Gemara, and we'll do a very quick review in next week's shir, which is Monday night, same time. We'll review this and then go ahead. So let's go through the steps. The Gemara said we were talking about matzah peres mufazarin. Again, we got that from the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Eilu Mitziyus shalai, these are the things that they could keep. Matzah peres mufazarin, right? We had this text in the Mishnah. Eilu Mitziyus shalai, sorry for blocking that. Ve'elu chayav lachros, these you're responsible to announce. Eilu Mitziyus shalai, what are you allowed to keep? Matzah peres mufazarin, if you found spread out fruit. So then we come. Matzah peres mufazarin, that's a memra, a statement. So the Gemara asks a she'ela question, how much does it have to be scattered? And the Gemara answers, right, how much like this, like that? And the Gemara answers that it's Rabbi Yitzchak says it's a kav in 4 amas. That is the proper amount. That if there's more than a kav in 4 amas, a person will go back for it. If not less, we said again, this was a kav, a measure. Here was a amma, a person's hand. And this is what it would look like in the real world if you spread out a kav in 4 amas in that space. Okay, that ended Shir Aleph. Steps 1, 2, and 3. Right, let's just here's a good review here. Matzah peres mufazarin is the memra, this statement, right? V'kama, how much, that was circled, is the she'ela. And Rabbi Yitzchak answers the tshuva that it's 1 kav in 4 amas. We also did steps 4 and 5 today. The Gemara asks a serious question. Well, what's Rabbi Yitzchak talking about? If it fell, then he should be able to keep any of whatever it was, because the guy doesn't know where it is. He's not going to come back. And if it was neatly placed down, the person probably will come back because he knows where he left it. The Gemara answers that we're not talking about. So again, let's illustrate the question. So Rav Yitzchak's kav ba'arba amos, what was that? If it's derech hinuach, if he placed it down, then he's not allowed to keep it. If it was just scattered and lost, then he is allowed to keep it. So what's Rav Yitzchak talking about? The Gemara answers that it was talking about not an aveda. It was, we call it an aveda midas. It was something that they left, knowing that it was left behind, and therefore we would say that we're talking about this machnash of the beidari, and it was left behind. If a little bit was left behind, you can assume the guy's not coming back, and you can keep it. Otherwise, if not, you're allowed to keep it. Okay, folks, we're going to stop here. I'll unmute everybody. Let me see just a moment. Okay, I'll ask you folks, if you're not speaking, if you'd be kind enough to mute yourself, so if there is background noise. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, either chat or feel free to chat or just speak up. Let me just see what we have here. All portions of Mishnah, Gemara, Lashon Kodesh. Let me go through your questions first. Before material is available for sale or download. So these books are all available on Amazon. If you go to Amazon and just do a search for, you do Rabbi Spivak, Gemara, Bright Beginnings, Yaakov Horowitz, one of those tags will make it come up. It's also available in a tablet form, except for this new book. The other previous books are all on the Apple Store. If you go to the Apple Books, the ebooks, and you type one of those things, it'll come up also. Okay, what was the other question? Introduction to Gemara. Are all certain portions of the Mishnah Gemara Lashon Kodesh or Aramaic? Okay, so right, typically the Mishnah is generally in Hebrew. And there we go, Yisrael, thank you. So the Mishnah is typically in Hebrew, and the Gemara is in Aramaic. Maybe a little bit later, I'll show you how often you have words that you can figure out in Aramaic. If you know the Hebrew words, you can figure out the Aramaic. My advice, folks, like I said, take all the barriers away. Just leave the translation to ArtScroll or whatever else you're using for translation. I don't think that you should burden yourself with this. I don't think it's a good idea. Next class, yes, the next class is on Monday. If you registered, we're doing Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday this week and next. I might offer another week for Yishalom Das. We'll see how the pace and how it goes. Thank you very much. I'm glad you found it helpful. So the next class is Monday night. Now, if you did not, I'll send an email either tomorrow or Friday with some materials, the Spike the Football, and I'll send you the recordings of this. And if you have a moment, maybe grab a Gemara and just try to maybe go over those words yourself. Don't get stressed if it's difficult. Just we'll have enough to do here. But I really suggest that try not to get stressed over the translation right now. Hopefully that will come with time, and if not, you have a tool that can do it for you. Okay, any other questions, folks? Okay, are we good? Are we done, folks? Okay, so I wish you mazel. I hope you folks enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope you feel that you're really making progress. This is the way it goes. And I really believe that you'll have the fundamentals in a very short period of time to be able to do this yourselves with children. It's just about getting you up to the fourth floor. Good night, everyone. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and we'll see you all Monday night. Thanks so much.